Superman has had a complicated history on film. Movies that are good, bad, and unmade, the Man of Steel has seen everything. Well, what if I told you that there was one Superman movie in particular that was set to be the most unconventional of all, that would have seen Tim Burton directing Nic Cage as Superman and potentially Christopher Walken as Brainiac? Well, that's the movie we'll be discussing today as we break down the development, plot, and cancellation of Superman Lives. The year was 1996. Writer and director Kevin Smith was in a meeting at Warner Brothers related to him potentially working on a few different projects for the studio. Over the course of that conversation, it was incidentally mentioned that the studio was also trying to crack a script that would reinvent Superman for the 1990s. Smith was given the existing Superman script, titled Superman Reborn, which had been in development for years and adapted the comic storyline, The Death and Return of Superman. Smith felt that this script fundamentally misunderstood the character of Superman. His comments eventually landed him in front of Warner Brothers executive Lorenzo di Bonaventura, who asked Smith how he would handle Superman. After hearing some ideas, including changing the film's title from Superman Reborn to Superman Lives, Smith was sent to meet with the producer in charge of Superman Reborn, Jon Peters, who also produced Batman and executive produced Batman Returns. In that meeting, Smith claims that he was given 3 mandates. Peters didn't want to see Superman fly as he felt the flying effects looked fake, give Superman a different costume, and Superman had to fight a giant spider. Though Peters refutes that he gave Smith the first 2 points. From there, Smith began writing his script, and claims that at some point he was told by Peters, "You know why you and me are going to get this project right and make a great movie? Because you and me understand Superman. We're from the streets." I was like, you were a hairdresser once, I'm from the suburbs, neither of us are from the streets. Smith felt that Peters would try to influence the story in strange ways. For example, Smith envisioned Superman and Doomsday's pivotal battle in the streets of Metropolis, but Peters urged him to set it in the subway and sewers. Or after seeing Smith's movie, Chasing Amy, calling him with a note about Brainiac's henchman, L-Ron. According to Smith, telling him, "That gay black guy in your movie did an excellent job. That's what we need in Superman. We need that kind of attitude, that voice." What about L-Ron? Can't he have a voice like that? Can't he be gay? I want a gay R2-D2. Another unconventional ask was to have Brainiac fight Superman's guards in front of the Fortress of Solitude, which left Smith confused as he felt Superman wouldn't need guards at the fortress. So Peter suggested that instead, Brainiac fights a polar bear. This push and pull of Peter's ideas and philosophies left Smith frustrated, as he felt the producer was emphasizing the film's merchandising potential while also attempting to cut critical scenes that built out characters and their motivations. Smith recalls Peters telling him at one point, "It doesn't matter how good the dialogue is between Lois and Superman, it's about how many toys we could sell." Overall, Smith felt that, on the project, I won some battles, I lost some, we had a great time doing it, the studio loved the script. Over the course of his time working on the movie, Smith would go on to turn in 2 drafts, with his second draft featuring Brainiac and Lex Luthor teaming up so that Lex could end Superman and Brainiac could harvest the energy from the Eradicator, a robotic force created by Superman's father, Jor-El. After launching a satellite that uses an array of lasers to block out the sun, Brainiac uses Doomsday, a creature from his menagerie, to attack and end a depowered Superman. From here, the Eradicator warps his body to the Fortress of Solitude, revives him, and becomes a new suit that replicates all of Superman's powers. Eventually, the Eradicator destroys the satellite and Superman is repowered, allowing him to stop Brainiac and Luthor once and for all. Some highlights of this draft include Brainiac fighting the polar bear, a Batman cameo during the funeral, Lex ripping his shirt open during a press conference Superman style to reveal an undershirt that says "I'm a maniac" for Brainiac, and of course, the giant spider, which is referred to as a Thanagarian snare beast, a nod to the DC Comics planet Thanagar after Warner Brothers told Smith that he couldn't outwardly call the creature a spider. From here, the film set a July 4th, 1998 release date to commemorate the 60th year of Superman's debut in Action Comics #1, with directors including Robert Rodriguez being offered but ultimately turning down the gig. In the process of developing the film, Smith floated Tim Burton as a name he'd like to see direct the project, and ultimately, his wish would be granted. Burton would sign on to direct the film, but in the process, upend all of Smith's work. And despite Peters promising Smith that he would be on board for the film's entire production, directly led to the writer being shown the door. In 2000, Smith retroactively recalled that, "It's just a shame because we were so close. This movie was going to be rolling into production, God, they were talking about starting as soon as summer of '97, and we were so close." Burton wanted a clean slate with no influence from the script written by Smith, though Warner Brothers did mandate that certain core ideas like Superman's death and return, and Brainiac, Lex, and Doomsday being villains, remain intact. Before long, Nic Cage was cast in the title role, and they began developing the look of the character and testing costumes. Burton's collaborator on Batman Returns, Wesley Strick, was brought on to rewrite the script, and the movie entered pre-production in the summer of 1997. Over the course of a few months, Strick would turn in 2 drafts of his script to Warner Brothers. His first draft, simply titled Superman, would feature Brainiac, now an AI created by Jor-El, teaming up with Lex Luthor so he can capture K, a self-sustaining, self-sufficient model of Brainiac, also created by Jor-El, so that he can also be free in that same way. After Clark first meets K in Antarctica and is warned that he's in danger, Lex and Brainiac use a satellite to block out the sun and depower Superman. Doomsday is sicked on Superman by Brainiac in a bid to draw K out. Superman is slain, but taken back to the Fortress of Solitude, where he's revived with some memory loss, and K becomes his new suit that replicates his powers. Eventually, Lex and Brainiac merge to become one being with 2 heads, and after being shot by Lex's sun gun, Superman returns to his old self, K sacrifices itself, the satellite is destroyed, and Superman stops Lexiac once and for all. Some highlights from this version include Doomsday being envisioned as a Yeti-like creature, Superman's S is able to break apart and be used as sharp weapons, Superman's iconic S in this draft is on Jor-El's suit on Krypton and it stands for science, and finally, Lois and Jimmy stealing Clark's body from the morgue and replacing it with a dead drunk to be buried in Superman's tomb. After roughly 3 or 4 months, Warner Brothers would tell Burton to fire the writer after the studio's CEO read and disliked his latest draft. In addition to the studio, after a string of box office bombs, becoming more cost-conscious, felt that his script would lead to the film having an inflated budget. Enter writer Dan Gilroy, who was brought on to do yet another rewrite and submitted his first draft in February of 1998, which had no regard for budget, since he was never told that it was even a concern. This draft featured Lex Luthor and Brainiac clubbing, Richard Donner as the priest who officiates Superman's funeral, cameos by Elton John and Shaq, and in Gilroy's own words, there was no end of gigantic sets and set pieces. We had the most massive urban fight that would have ever been shot. It was just carte blanche. Write whatever looks good. Let's really blow it. And boy, did that come back and bite us on the ass. After submitting that first draft, Peters called Gilroy and told him that the script's budget would have been massive, so he needed to rewrite it in a way that reduced the scope and the film's potential budget. Despite this setback, the project was moving full speed ahead to begin filming in summer of 1998. Locations were scouted and casting was underway, with Chris Rock being cast as Jimmy Olsen. Kevin Spacey was approached to play Lex Luthor, and Christopher Walken was Burton's top pick to play Brainiac, with Jim Carrey and Gary Oldman also in consideration. According to Peters, Sandra Bullock was the top choice to play Lois Lane, with Courtney Cox and Julianne Moore also in consideration. By September of 1998, Gilroy would submit his second and final draft of Superman Lives. But before long, the project would suffer a death with no return. But before we get into why, let's take a deep dive into the film's plot. Our story begins on the planet Krypton in the midst of its destruction. Scientist Jor-El races into his laboratory to find his wife Laura and infant son Kal-El. Suddenly, the power goes out, and the couple is greeted by a ghastly sight, Brainiac. A computerized terror that was created by Jor-El, who came to believe that his programming was flawed and took him offline. But in the early days of Kal-El's youth, Brainiac had quietly been evolving, and as revenge for his creator's neglect, sabotaged the planet. The couple manages to flee the villain and deposit Kal-El into a small spacecraft alongside a cube-like object. As he launches, Brainiac manages to end his parents and vows to hunt Kal-El for all of eternity. It's a starry night in the city of Metropolis, but evil never sleeps. A crew of criminals dump noxious waste into a lake, but Superman appears and proceeds to stop them. During this takedown, it's revealed that this scheme was orchestrated by Superman's nemesis, Lex Luthor. After torturing his lackey who was in charge of the lake job, the CEO of LexCorp begins to descend from his office atop the 100-story LexCorp building. As he approaches the lobby, his elevator is grabbed by a frustrated Superman who tells him that one day, when he could prove it, he'll put him away. Later that day, the feisty and no-nonsense Daily Planet reporter, Lois Lane, forces herself into a LexCorp press conference to meet up with her fellow reporter Clark Kent and photographer Jimmy Olsen. After she disrupts Lex's presentation, questioning LexCorp's shady track record, Luthor reveals that one of his satellites has identified evidence of a crashed UFO in Smallville, Kansas that's been buried for almost 30 years. Clark's mind begins to race, questions fly from the press, but eventually the room empties, with everybody rushing to the craft's dig site. As Lex exits the stage, he makes a pass at Lois, who promptly shuts him down. Later, the planet's editor-in-chief, Perry White, knowing that Clark is from Smallville, dispatches him, Lois, and Jimmy to cover the UFO story. As they arrive, Clark looks at an abandoned farmhouse on the other side of the field, the house that he grew up in. He thinks about his childhood, the Christmas where his parents told him that he has to hide his powers for now, but one day he'll get to use them for good. And eventually, a memory of him asking his mom how he was found. She tells him that he was a gift from God, that she found him across the field under the old tree. Clark looks down and notices that he's standing next to the former tree's stump. As the craft is unearthed, it begins to glow. Meanwhile, in Clark's apartment, the cube also begins to glow. Out in space, sensors start to blink in Brainiac's ship as a map pinpoints our solar system. He has finally found Kal-El. In Clark's apartment, he inspects the cube, curious why it's glowing, what it is, and questions where he's even from. To clear his head, he goes on a walk. He can hear families and couples, loving and very human moments. Overwhelmed, he shoots off into the sky, so fast that his clothes burn off, revealing the suit underneath. He lands on the roof of the Daily Planet and is greeted by Lois. They've been seeing each other for over a year, and Lois makes it clear that she wants to see him more. But Superman is cagey about it, which frustrates Lois. She knows his heart, but she doesn't know anything about him when he's gone. The conversation comes to an awkward end, and she leaves a despondent Superman in the company of only his thoughts. The next day, Lois is intently chasing more information for the UFO story, but Clark interrupts her and tells her that he needs to talk to her later, alone. And Lois's interest is piqued. Clark is never interested in anything outside of work. As Brainiac's ship heads to Earth, he intercepts transmissions to find info on the crashed ship, and stumbles upon Lex's press conference. That night at dinner, Clark tells Lois that Superman was the occupant of the alien ship. But Lois doesn't believe it. How can Clark know so much about Superman anyway? He always shows up right after he leaves. And then, it clicks. She takes off his glasses, but she still can't believe it. Clark grabs a coal from the hibachi grill and squeezes it into a diamond. Stunned, she asks why it took him so long to tell her this. Clark tells her that he didn't know who he was. All this time he hoped he was human, but now he doesn't even know his own biology. What if they wanted to have a kid? What if the baby punched its way out of Lois's stomach? Lois reaffirms her love to Clark, but for now, he needs some time alone. The next morning, the Daily Planet releases Lois's expose on Lex, his payoffs, his ties to organized crime, his liposuction, it's all there. And Lex is furious. Just then, the power goes out and Brainiac emerges from the shadows beside a massive creature, Doomsday. Lex is questioned about the Kryptonian, and he has no idea what Brainiac is talking about, until he's shown Jor-El's crest and makes the connection that Superman is the alien. Upon learning that Superman is revered worldwide, Brainiac is furious. So hearing that Lex is the second most powerful person on Earth, he forcibly takes over Lex's body to enact his plan, merging with him to become Lexiac. Lex Luthor to the naked eye, but Brainiac is running the show entirely. He threatens Lex's assistant, Morris, to tell him what he knows about Superman, and he's sheepishly told that Lois Lane always seems to get the inside scoop on him. Lois meets Lexiac on the day of the big public unveiling of the spacecraft at the LexCorp building for his rebuttal on the expose. This interview quickly turns into Lexiac fishing for info on Superman and flirting with Lois. But this is interrupted by Clark appearing and lying that Perry needs them back at the office to escape the conversation. Lexiac is frustrated. He needs to find Kal-El. But Morris tells him that Superman really only ever appears in a time of crisis. So Lexiac sabotages the main elevators of the building, which are filled with children, including Lois's niece, Amy, who's staying with her for a few weeks. Clark manages to slip away and emerge as Superman, and in a tense but heroic act, manages to save everybody in all 3 cars. A crowd gathers to thank him, but he's consumed by a high-pitched noise that seemingly nobody else hears. He excuses himself and shoots to the top of the elevator shaft to pinpoint the source of the sound. Eventually, Lexiac appears and refers to our hero as Kal-El, which confuses him. Lexiac's face then ripples out to reveal Brainiac's hideous head. Before long, Doomsday charges out of the darkness, sending him and Kal-El over the edge of the 1,000-foot shaft. They eventually crater in the LexCorp lobby. As they exchange blows, Doomsday impales his opponent, and the wound oozes kryptonite slime. Battered, he manages to catch Doomsday in a gas main explosion that obliterates everything. Lois runs into the debris to find Superman climbing to the top of the crater, mortally wounded. He collapses in her arms, telling her in his dying breath that he loves her, and always did. In Clark's apartment, the cube glows intensely and opens as a blinding light shoots out, but quickly subsides. The world mourns the death of Superman. A funeral procession takes his body into an ornate tomb in Metropolis. As the procession departs, a light filters in from the darkness and materializes as a mysterious figure who approaches the casket and tells Kal-El that he's failed him. That night, as Lexiac goes on Night Live to debate Lois on A World Without Superman, the being stands over the coffin, zapping it to rally Superman's return. He begins to stir and flashes back to the night that he met Lois Lane when he was a new hire at the Daily Planet Christmas party, and how he was immediately smitten with her. But before long, Clark realizes he's inside of a memory. Eventually, he awakens in a new, robotic-looking suit and comes face-to-face with the being, who introduces itself as K. He was created by Jor-El to protect him. To do that, they need to flee the planet and get away from Brainiac. Superman refuses, but quickly learns that his injuries put his Kryptonian physiology in stasis. So while he's revived, he's lost any superpowers he has. As he leaves the tomb, he's beaten up by some thugs while trying to defend a couple from being harassed. Kay shoots out of the tomb as a bright light, and the suit begins to glow. Kay explains that he can approximate a small fraction of Superman's powers, and Superman manages to take out his opponents, but winds up bruised and bloody. Meanwhile, Lexiac realizes that by killing Kal-El, he's etched the story of Superman being the world's greatest hero into history forever, and decides that now there's only one way to remove all traces of him. After saving a little boy from a burning building, Kay notifies Superman that he's reading an electronic signature of a technology he's only encountered one other time, when Brainiac destroyed Krypton, and estimates that the villain's plan will be executed tomorrow. Superman convinces Kay to let him try to stop Lexiac, but Kay tells him that if he fails, he'll forcibly take control of the suit and have them flee the planet. Superman sneaks into Lois's apartment and startles her. She can't understand how he's alive, but neither can he. They smooch. Superman tells her that he can't stay, and explains that something has taken over Lex, it wants to destroy the planet, and how he has to stop it. In Lex's office sits a bank of monitors showing ballistic missiles in their silos around the world. Nearby is a countdown timer, a few hours away from zero. Superman sneaks into the office and notices the machine that Lexiac is using to gain access to Earth's weapons and tries to disable it, ripping servos out. But Kay senses Brainiac drawing near, so he takes control of the suit right before Superman can finish and forces him to flee. As Lexiac enters the room, he finds the crushed servos on the floor, so he heads to Superman's tomb and finds it empty. Meanwhile, in Lois's office, she receives a phone call from her doctor. She's pregnant with a baby boy. Overwhelmed, she begins to cry. But this swell of emotion is short-lived as Lexiac appears in the doorway, carrying a bouquet of roses, under the guise of checking in to see how she's holding up. He quickly asks if she's been to the tomb or had any unexpected visitors lately. But Lois shoos him away. Her phone rings again. It's Amy, panicked. Someone is trying to break into Lois's apartment. She begins to rush home, but on the way is kidnapped. Kay takes Superman to the riverside as they bicker, telling him that he's the only hope for his people, so he had to protect him. Superman tells him that the protective instinct that Kay feels for him, he feels for the people of Earth. That he's always been protected by his powers, but he never knew what that protection really meant until he lost it. But now he's inspired by the people without them, the people who can get hurt and choose to rush into danger anyway, the people who lose everything and keep going. He can beat Brainiac, because it's not about his powers. It's because he believes. Earth is his home, and these are his people. A ball of light appears before him and turns into a projection of Jor-El and Laura. They tell him these feelings are connected with his physiology. His powers were never gone. He just had to learn his truth. As the light extinguishes, they tell their son that they'll never be far away. As the K-suit disintegrates to reveal Superman reborn in his suit and cape. In Lexiac's office, he has Lois and Amy captured with Jor-El's crest mounted above the fireplace. As the countdown timer enters its final minutes, the villain tells his captives that he's taking them with him to a new planet to rule after he destroys this one. Just then, his ship fills the sky. Civilians on the ground scatter in a frenzy. Superman comes crashing through the window, and the battle quickly begins. As the machine's clock ticks down, Lexiac grabs and threatens Lois. But thinking quickly, she tells Superman that he can't stop Brainiac. He's a god. Distracted by his pride, Superman is able to separate them. Lexiac eventually shoots a life-draining beam at our hero. As he struggles to fight its power, Lois dives in the way, momentarily blocking it, which gives Superman just enough time to grab his father's crest and hurl the razor-sharp metal into the machine, stopping the clock at 15 seconds. Absolutely fuming, Brainiac unfuses from Lex, revealing his grotesque, uncloaked form. Superman detaches his head from his body, but the head rolls across the floor, connecting to the machine to continue the countdown. Superman rips the head off of the machine, but Brainiac retaliates by shooting a beam into his brother's head, possessing him, trying to destroy him from the inside out. Kal-El tries to fight it, convulsing, but Lois tells him that he can't let Brainiac win. He's going to be a father. Superman uses all of his willpower and shoots the beam back into Brainiac's head. He punches it into a wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces, and finally, Brainiac is dead. Superman rockets up toward the ship, shoots a blast of heat vision, and it explodes like fireworks over the city. As day breaks, an ambulance takes away a groggy Lex, who doesn't remember anything about his time being possessed, as Lois and Clark finally begin to plan their future together. The sun rises on the streets of Metropolis, and the city begins to come back to life. The people below look up in the sky. It's not a bird. It's not a plane. It's somebody with a new lease on life, returning to be among his people. Because Superman lives. Given Superman Lives' insane development history up to this point, I think it's a miracle that this script is as coherent as it is. I personally think that Superman is at his best when he's very secure in his humanity. But as far as a story goes that sees him struggling to reconcile his human and alien lives, I think that this is a solid script that, at the very least, would make for a very interesting watch had it been made. So that raises the question, with the film a few months away from going in front of cameras, why did it get canned? Jumping back to April of 1998, with mere weeks before filming, Warner Brothers, after a few production start delays already, delayed Superman Lives and diverted the film's funds to another one of Peter's productions, the Will Smith film Wild Wild West, which would, in fact, go on to feature a giant spider. Despite this setback, WB assured that the project was still in active development, which was technically true as Gilroy at this point hadn't submitted his second draft of the script yet. But Burton was devastated, and shortly after departed the project to direct Sleepy Hollow. Retrospectively, Burton would state, "If they'd just allowed us to make the film, I think that we could have done something interesting. And you know, it was going to be an expensive movie. They made a choice. They had this, Superman, and Wild Wild West, and they opted for that and canned this one. It's frustrating. I like to be positive, but I really do feel that I wasted a year of my life. That's a terrible feeling. You never want to feel that in anything you do." From there, we return to September of 1998, when Gilroy submitted his second draft of the script. Despite its submission after Burton's departure, this draft began life while he was still on the project. And had Burton stayed on, or had the project actually gone in front of cameras in late spring of '98, it's extremely likely that this budget-conscious version of the film, or at least something close to it, would have been the one that was made. Using Gilroy's script, Peters offered the director's chair to names like Michael Bay, Martin Campbell, and Brett Ratner, who all turned the project down. Eventually, Gilroy was booted from the project and replaced with William Wisher Jr. in June of 1999, with Cage assisting on various story elements. His first draft, submitted in February of 2000, featured Brainiac and Lex Luthor teaming up, with Lex being given kryptonite to enhance his technology, in exchange for him calling a press conference to draw out Superman. Brainiac uses his creature Doomsday to attack and end our hero, and Superman's body is stolen from the casket by Mal-R, the last knight of Krypton. As it turns out, Superman is the prince of Krypton, and when the planet blew up, others escaped and scattered and are waiting for him to return and reunite them. Superman is revived, powerless, and uses Kryptonian knight armor to fight his way through LexCorp and eventually gets to Brainiac. After letting go of his hatred for Brainiac and focusing on his love for Lois, his powers return and he stops Brainiac once and for all. The story concludes with him and Lois deciding to leave Earth to try and find the scattered Kryptonians. Some highlights in this script include Matrix-inspired action scenes, a final battle that includes a sword fight between Superman and Brainiac, and a subplot where Lex tries to build a neck implant called LexLink, which allows the user to wirelessly access the internet. Oliver Stone was offered the director's chair for this incarnation of the script, but despite publicly noting that he was interested, ultimately turned it down. In June of 2000, Cage would drop out of the project. Wisher would submit a final draft in August, but at that point, Warner Brothers would look to other avenues to reboot The Man of Steel, as Superman Lives would finally die. Years later, the film would come to have a new awareness and lease on life, thanks largely to the 2015 documentary, The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened, which would then lead to DC being pitched but ultimately turning down doing Superman Lives as an animated film, though Cage would go on to play two different incarnations of Superman, landing the role in animation for Teen Titans Go to the Movies, and in live action, though heavily covered in CGI, as a cameo in The Flash, fighting a Thanagarian snare beast. Had this project come together and entered production, if nothing else, I would have been so interested to see Nic Cage's take on the character. Add to that Christopher Walken and Kevin Spacey under Burton's direction, and with that in mind, I think it's a shame that Superman Lives was never made. But that's the story of Superman Lives, and the end of yet another episode of Canned Goods. So until next time, thank you so much for watching, be good to each other, and stay hammers.